talking about you. Fortunately, when the robot stepped forward, he missed the door, banged into the wall, and fell to the floor. He got up and did it again, and then again. Better hurry up and roll, said Walter, before he makes it in here. Danny rolled the dice and took his card. You passed too close to Sorius 3. Gravity greatly increased. Then the room began to level out, but something strange was happening to Danny. Walter looked at him. Holy smokes, he said. Danny was getting shorter and wider, too. Soon, he was about to be the shape and size of a large beach ball. So, how does the author use humor in this story? How do you think the author is using humor in this story? Well, the appearance of the robot is a funny moment in the story, and the card says the robot is defective. Although he seems scary at first, the robot bangs his head into the wall and falls to the floor repeatedly. He is not a very smart robot. And the illustration on the spread is also funny because Danny has changed his form to resemble a beach ball. He has been stretched and inflated with a grimace on his face. Walter, he said in a low voice, I feel very heavy. Destroy alien life forms, the robot repeated from the hall as he picked himself up again. This time he made it to the door and headed for Walter. Danny yelled to his brother, Push me! What? Said Walter. Push me! Danny yelled again. Just push me! Walter bent down and gave his brother a shove, and Danny whirled across the room like a giant bowling ball and knocked the robot over, flattening his legs. Did I get him? Said Danny, who couldn't see because he'd rolled up against the wall and was upside down. Walter pushed him back to the board game. You sure did, he said. You were terrific. Walter picked up the dice and rolled. He took his card in his hand and trembled as he read, Zorgon, pirate ship, launches, photon, attack. Through the windows, the boys saw a spaceship. 2 points of light shot from the ship and headed directly for the Budwing house. The first one hit the chimney and sent bricks flying into the fireplace, and the second one hit the upstairs bathroom. Water began dripping down in the hole of the ceiling. Walter handed the dice to Danny, who had a hard time lifting his short, heavy arm, and he rolled as Walter moved the token for him. He slowly returned to his normal shape. A card popped out, and Danny read it silently. This is bad, he said. Zorgon pirate boards your vessel. The room shook as the spaceship banged up against the house, and the boys heard footsteps on the roof. Through the opening in the ceiling, they saw someone or something climb through the hole in the roof and enter the room above them. Danny and Walter moved to the hallway, standing behind the flattened robot. They held each other, too terrified to move. A humming sound came from their feet. They looked down and saw the robot's eyes light up. He lifted his head, fixed his eyes in the hole of the ceiling, and spoke. Alien life form, must destroy. His claw-like hands twitched, but he couldn't get up. So what do you think is going to happen next in this story? What do you think is going to happen next in this story? Well, the robot will probably try to destroy the Zorgon pirate, or the robot and the Zorgon pirate will fight each other. Well, based on the past events of the text, you might also suggest that Walter will take his turn and then the Zorgon pirate ship will go away. We'll have to see. With that being said, what do you think Zorgon might be? What do you think he might be? Well, the story mentions a Zorgon pirate ship and a Zorgon pirate. Zorgon is most likely a planet somewhere in outer space. This may also explain why the pirate ship launches an attack against Danny and Walter, who are from Earth. With that being said, our evidence here is we have a Zorgon. A pirate is aboard a Zorgon pirate ship, right? And the conclusion we can draw from that is that Zorgon, let's fix that, Zorgon. Wow. Zorgon, we'll try that again, must be the name of a planet where the Zorgon pirate is from. Let's continue to read. Now Danny and Walter helped him to his feet. He staggered forward as the pirate's scaly tail and lizard-like legs swung down from the hole. The robot lifted one of his claws and snapped it sharply around the creature's tail. The Zorgon howled, jerking himself back up through the hole with the robot still attached. He thrashed and wailed, banging against the walls overhead, but then minus one arm, the robot dropped down through the hole, and the boys heard the Zorgon scramble across the roof and saw the flash of his rocket as his ship sped away. It seemed hopeless. The robot's eyes were dark again. They'd been playing almost 3 hours, and their tokens rested a galaxy away from Zathura and twice as far from Earth. We're never going to make it. Sure we are. He handed the dice to his brother. Me and you, together. We can do this. Walter cradled the dice in his hand and sighed. You and I, he said wearily. You and I, he looked. That's right, said Danny. Together. Walter rolled the dice, a 1 and a 2. He moved his token to the only black square on the board. The card popped out. You've entered a black hole, Walter read. Go back in time 1 hour for each mark in the dice. He jumped up and looked around the room. You see any black holes? His brother pointed to the floor. A black spot started slowly spreading under Walter's feet, like a perfectly round puddle of ink. At first, Walter thought he was sinking into it, but it was the hole that was rising. He tried to run, but couldn't feel his feet. Then the hole rose higher. He couldn't feel his legs either. What's going on? He cried. Danny looked below the disc-like hole. Walter, he said, the bottom part of you is gone. As the hole rose higher and higher, there was less and less of Walter until only his head remained. Danny tried to pull on the hole to save what was left of his brother, but his hands passed through the blackness as if they were made of smoke. His chin dropped to his chest, and he began to sob. Why do you think Danny begins to sob? How is this card different from the others? Why do you think Danny's beginning to sob, and why is this card different from the others? Well, I think Danny begins to sob because Walter is disappearing and he fears that he will never see his brother again. If I was Danny, I would also be scared of being left alone to finish the game. This card is different from the others because the first time there is nothing Danny could do to save Walter. But when Walter's gravity was reversed, Danny tied him to the sofa. Then the robot wanted to attack Walter and Danny rolled him over like a bowling ball. But as Walter disappears, Danny is completely helpless. Danny, Walter called softly. Danny looked up at his brother, floating head. Danny, he began. I never told you this, and that was all he got to say because the hole kept rising past his mouth, his nose, and finally right over the top of his head. Walter was completely swallowed up, floating into empty darkness. He closed his eyes and began to spin, plunging head over heels through the pitch black space. Then thud, he landed hard on his knees. There was something in his arms, something wriggling around. He opened his eyes and found himself back in the park by his house. He had an arm wrapped tightly around Danny's neck and hand gripping the boy's nose. I'm telling, Danny squealed. Walter let go and fell back in the grass. He was dizzy, very dizzy. Danny jumped up and started to run, but stopped. Hey, he said, what's that? He went to the tree and picked up a box resting on the trunk. He held the box out to Walter. Look, it's some kind of game. Walter grabbed it. Hey, give it back, said Danny. His brother got to his feet. You don't want to play this, he said. Trust me, I tried it once. He went over to the trash can, jammed the box deeply inside. Come on, he said. I've got a better idea. Let's go play catch. Danny smiled. You mean together? Me and you? Walter put his arm around his brother. Yeah, that's right, he said. Me and you, together. Now, what does Walter realize about the game Danny finds in the park? What does he realize about the game? Well, Walter tells Danny not to play the game because he has already played it. This is evidence that Walter did not enjoy playing and would never do it again. He has learned the game is dangerous. So Walter tells Danny not to play the game. And the conclusion we can draw from this is that Walter has learned the game is dangerous. Okay, go ahead and look on page 283 where those questions are because you guys are going to be required to answer these questions. I'll go ahead and go through them briefly with you so that it'll help you get a better grade on those 1 through 4. Now, number 1 says, use the conclusion diagram to help you conclude what Walter would do if Danny brought home the game again. What evidence do you have from your conclusion? Okay, it says, we just figured that out at the very end, what I did right here on this last section here. We know that if Danny brought the game home again, Walter would probably refuse to play it or let Danny play it. When the boys find the game again at the end of the story, Walter takes it and throws it in the trash can. Okay, so the answer there would be Walter will tell Danny not to play the game. Okay, because Walter has learned that the game is dangerous. Number 2 says reread page 381. What was Walter going to tell Danny before the black hole swallowed him? What do you think Walter was going to tell Danny? It says, Danny, Walter called softly. Danny looked up at his brother's floating head. Danny, he began, I never told you this, but I... And that was all he said. Okay, what do you think he might have was getting ready to tell him? You know, Walter and Danny are constantly fighting. But at the end of the story, it seems very interesting that Walter now wants to play with Danny. So Walter was probably going to tell Danny that he loves him. Even though the boys argue a lot, they still look after each other, even in dangerous situations. Now, number 3, if you were going on a space adventure during which you would be dodging meteors, aliens, and robots, would you choose Danny, Walter, or both to go with you? And explain. You know, and this is an opinion. You have to decide if you want Danny, Walter, or both. But if I was to give you my opinion is I probably would want to have both Danny and Walter with me, because when you have serious problems, it's good to have more than one person help you because you have different perspectives. And number 4, a robot saves Danny and Walter from an alien. What do you think robots will do in the future? And this is something you get to decide. What do you think robots are going to do in the future? With that being said, that concludes this link, and if you have further questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to contact me.